Yakuza finger removal. Also known as yubatsumi, this is a ritual performed to obtain forgiveness after a member has committed an offense against someone within their own group. It consists of amputating part of the little finger as a sign of sincere apology and remorse towards the other person. This punishment is considered less painful compared to others, since it usually does not cause lifelong chronic pain and is not necessarily deadly, unlike the more brutal practices that appear later on the list. Bastinado. It consists of beating the victim with a light rod, a knotted cord, or a lash, exclusively on the soles of the feet. Unlike most forms of flogging, its main purpose is not to cause serious injury, but to inflict intense pain. However, if applied too harshly or for too long, it can incapacitate the person, leaving them unable to walk. Even so, this punishment is usually not deadly. Pitch capping. This punishment consisted of pouring hot pitch or tar into a conical paper cap, which was then forced onto the victim's head. The substance was allowed to cool, and afterwards the cap was torn off, removing skin and tissue from the scalp, leaving permanent scars. It was not usually carried out with the intention of killing, but the risk of severe infections after the procedure was always present. Elephant's foot. This punishment, also known as gungar, was mainly used in Asia, particularly in India, and consisted of executing the victim by crushing them under an elephant. There were two variations. In the first, considered the quick one, the victim's head was placed on a pedestal, and the elephant crushed it instantly, causing immediate death. The second version, however, was far more brutal. Some members of royalty preferred to prolong the suffering, ordering elephant riders to train the animals to step first on non-vital parts, such as the arms and legs. The condemned would be crushed repeatedly before the elephant finally ended their life by stepping on the head. Poena culae. In ancient Rome, a punishment existed for those who committed parricide, the murder of one's own father. The sentence involved being sewn into a leather sack together with several live animals: a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster. The sack was then thrown into the water, ensuring a horrific and inescapable death. Roman decimation. In Rome, when a military unit was guilty of serious crimes such as cowardice, mutiny, or desertion, the practice of decimation was applied. A group of about 480 soldiers was divided into groups of 10, and each group drew lots. The soldier who drew the shortest straw was executed by the other 9, usually by stoning, beating, or stabbing. The survivors were further punished by being forced to remain outside the fortified camp, vulnerable and disgraced. Because the choice was random, any soldier could be executed regardless of guilt. Blowing from a gun. This execution method consisted of tying the victim to the mouth of a cannon, which was then fired, causing instant death. An English soldier from the 19th century described the scene. The victim's head would shoot high into the air, the arms would fly off to the sides and land far away, while the legs fell beneath the cannon. Although the sight was terrifying, the death itself was immediate, meaning the person likely felt no pain. Basil II's blind journey emperor. Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, captured around 15,000 enemy soldiers after the Battle of Cleidion. To send a message to their homeland, he divided the prisoners into groups of 100. 99 men from each group were completely blinded, while the 100th was left with one eye so that he could lead the others back. When Tsar Samuel of Bulgaria saw his soldiers return in that state, he reportedly died soon after, struck by a heart attack. Castor oil poop barrels. This punishment forced a victim to drink large amounts of castor oil, which caused severe stomach pain and uncontrollable diarrhea. The person was then placed inside a human-sized barrel and kept there until they confessed. In extreme cases, if they refused to cooperate, they could be left inside until they drowned in their own body fluids. Immurement. This punishment was used both as a form of execution and as lifelong imprisonment. It consisted of trapping a person in a confined space, often behind a wall. If it was applied as execution, the person was left there to starve to death. If it was applied as imprisonment, the victim was kept alive inside by receiving food regularly. The rack, this device, was a rectangular wooden table. The prisoner was tied by arms and legs, which were pulled in opposite directions, stretching the body. This caused unbearable pain, dislocations, and torn ligaments. It was mainly used to extract confessions, but if continued long enough, it could rip apart the limbs and lead to death by bleeding. Tarring and feathering. This was a method of public torture and humiliation. The victim was stripped, either completely or to the waist, and hot or warm tar was applied to the skin. After that, feathers were thrown onto the body, or the victim was rolled in them until fully covered. It caused severe burns, permanent scarring, and deep psychological humiliation, as the victim was forced to walk in public, looking like a grotesque figure. The pear of anguish. This was a metal device shaped like a pear, inserted into the mouth or other body cavities. Once inside, it was gradually expanded, tearing tissues apart and causing unbearable pain. It was designed to inflict maximum suffering rather than immediate death. Aztec live heart removal. In Aztec culture, certain rituals involve removing the hearts of captives as offerings to the sun god. The victim was placed on a ceremonial stone, and the priest cut open the abdomen with an obsidian or flint blade. The still-beating heart was torn out and lifted towards the sky as a sacred tribute. Heretic's fork. It was a collar with two sharp metal points, one placed under the chin and the other against the sternum. It was fastened tightly around the neck, forcing the victim to keep their head upright. Over time, the pain became unbearable, and the lack of sleep weakened the prisoner. Eventually, when the head could no longer be held up, the spikes pierced slowly through the flesh of the neck and jaw. Rat's cup, a method attributed to the Roman Emperor Nero, involved tying a container filled with starving rats onto the victim's stomach. Heat was applied to the bottom, forcing the animals to escape by burrowing into the body. In some regions of South America, there was an even crueler variation known as the rectoscope, where rats were inserted through a tube and forced to dig their way out from inside. Catherine's wheel. The condemned was tied to a large wooden wheel, and their limbs were struck with hammers or iron bars until the bones shattered in multiple places. The wheel was then displayed publicly, often leaving the victim to die slowly from hunger or thirst. Boiling alive. The victim was lowered into a huge container filled with boiling liquid, such as oil. The fingers and toes, extremely sensitive to pain, were the first to burn. Then the skin, muscles, and fat began to soften and melt, while the internal organs slowly cooked from the outside. In another version, the person was placed in water at normal temperature, which was gradually heated until it reached boiling point, making the process even longer and more agonizing. Keel hauling, a feared maritime punishment. The sailor was tied with ropes and dragged under the ship's hull from one side to the other. Along the way, they could drown or be torn apart by the sharp, rusty wood of the vessel. If they survived, the punishment was repeated until they could no longer endure it. Impalement. In one of its most infamous forms, the victim was positioned on a sharp stake so that it did not pierce any vital organs, as long as the person managed to stay balanced on their toes. Each time exhaustion set in, the body would slip further down, driving the stake deeper. This cycle of pain and struggle continued until something vital was pierced. Another variant was the Judas chair, a pyramid-shaped seat where the victim was lowered with ropes, their weight pressing down on the sharp apex, slowly tearing their body apart. Flaying, this gruesome method, involved removing the skin from the body while the victim was still alive. Since the skin lacks major blood vessels, death was not immediate, which prolonged the agony. Executioners often carried out the process with precision, sometimes using boiling water or other substances to make it easier. The result was extreme pain and a slow death caused by shock or infection. Blood eagle. A brutal ritual in which the ribs were cut open from the spine and spread apart to resemble wings, while the lungs were pulled out through the openings. The process caused unbearable suffering and was regarded as one of the most horrifying punishments ever recorded. Lingqi. Also known as death by 1,000 cuts, this was practiced in ancient China to extend suffering for as long as possible. The executioner made a series of cuts deep enough to inflict tremendous pain, but not enough to cause immediate death. In some versions, each cut corresponded to a randomly chosen body part, and the torment continued until the heart was finally pierced. Other accounts describe victims tied in nets with pieces of flesh cut away, or even having their skulls opened and mercury poured inside, separating skin from flesh as the person writhed in agony. Scaphism, considered by many to be the most dreadful method of all, the condemned was placed inside or between two boats, with arms and legs protruding. They were force-fed large amounts of milk and honey, which also coated their body. This attracted insects, rodents, and other animals that fed on the flesh day after day. Each morning, the process was repeated, feeding the victim again and smearing more honey on their body. Some reports claim victims survived more than 2 weeks, their flesh rotting and swarming with parasites and worms, while still alive and trapped in their own filth.